Have you ever had a burden that runs so deep inside of you that it takes over your entire being? Now, I'm not talking about things like the burden of having to do the dishes or getting up early to go to work every day, but rather I'm talking about a deep-seated passion that starts in your heart, and then it begins to permeate everything that you think about, everything that you do, everything that you are. It's the kind of burden that you will never be able to shake off until you do something about it. I'm Trey Sansom, and I have a burden for people who are disconnected from Christ. It encompasses my entire being. It's what I think about when I wake up and when I go to bed. You see, I remember the chains that I was in before I became a Christian, and I experienced the freedom that I found in Jesus every single day, and I want everyone to experience that same burden. And that's why I have this burden for disconnected people. And this burden has taken me right up to the edge of a cliff, just like Indiana Jones, where the only way forward is to step out in faith, quit the job that I love, sell my home, move my family to St. Louis, and enroll in seminary so that I can eventually plant a church. And I have to trust that God will be there to hold me up and provide everything that I need to do it. Now, some people might say that this sounds like more like a leap of faith. But for me to get to this point, it's been less of a leap and more like a series of steps out in faith. You see, I feel called to plant a church. And you might be thinking, why plant a church? Well, a few years ago, I started working as the worship leader for a church plant called The Point. And The Point meets in a movie theater, and they have a mission of connecting the disconnected to a growing and reproducing relationship with Jesus Christ. It was a perfect fit for me because that's where my heart is. It's a place where people can come as they are and experience just how much God loves them right where they are, not where we want them to be. And I've seen God change at least 100 lives since I've been at The Point. Now, you would think that this experience would ease my burden, like it would lessen it a little bit, but instead, the burden has grown stronger and stronger. And then I saw a study that was done by Kirk Hathaway and Penny Marler. And this study indicates that 79.6% of people in the U.S. are disconnected from church. That means that nearly 8 out of 10 people, 8 out of 10 of my neighbors, 8 out of 10 of my friends do not know Jesus. To put it into perspective, the U.S. has a population of 320 million people, which means that 254,720,000 people are disconnected. That number makes the 100 lives that I've seen changed at The Point look minuscule in comparison. And my burden was growing bigger and bigger by the day. And so through the prompting of my pastor and the Holy Spirit and a ton of prayer, I decided to take my first step out in faith and pursue church planting. Because I believe that the world needs more places that reach out to disconnected people. But I tried to do it on my own terms instead of on God's terms. And as you'll find out, I'm a little bit slow in this area. It takes me a while to get it sometimes. So pastors and church leaders kept telling me that I needed to go to seminary in St. Louis. The problem was that seminary takes 4 years. And I dropped out of college years ago to pursue a career in rock and roll, but that's another story for another day. But before I could even go to seminary, I'd have to get my bachelor's degree. And that means that it would be 8 years before I could even get started planting a church. And I'm staring 40 right in the face. I'm not a young chicken anymore. So I explored every other conceivable option to plant a church without having to go to St. Louis. But every single one of those doors was shut in my face hard. I was getting frustrated. I was starting to wonder why I had even taken that first step. But looking back, every time that I felt like God might be letting me down, He was really holding me up and steering me in the direction that I was really supposed to go. I just couldn't see it yet. You see, that's the thing about faith. According to the Bible, faith is the confidence that what we hope for will actually happen. It gives us assurance about things we cannot see. It's kind of like Indiana Jones looking over the edge of the cliff. He knows that he has to get to the other side. He couldn't see the bridge that would eventually get him there, but he had to have enough faith to step out and confidence that somehow he wouldn't fall to his death. Indy realized that the only way for him to move forward was to step out in faith. So with my plans for planting a church not panning out, once again, I felt like I was looking over the edge of a cliff. I still wasn't convinced that I needed to move to St. Louis, but I did realize that I'm not getting any younger and that the only way to move forward was to step out in faith again. So I enrolled in college at Bethel University. I didn't know what was going to come of it. I didn't even know how I was going to pay for it. But God has been more than faithful. I just had to step out in faith and trust that God would provide everything that I need. And He has. You see, God provided enough funding to pay for school, and I even get a nice reimbursement check in the mail every semester. But that still didn't answer the question of how would I become a church planter? You see, out of options, I decided to take a look at Concordia Seminary's website. And I noticed that they have an alternate route program where I can receive a certificate rather than a master's degree. And that's not a problem for me because my goal is to plant a church, not get a degree. And instead of 4 years, it's only 2 years in St. Louis and then a 1-year internship at a church. I thought, man, here's the solution. It wasn't my first choice since I'd still have to move to St. Louis, but I figured that I could rent my house out for a couple of years and then come back to the Point to do my internship. So my wife and I prayed, and then we decided that we should take yet another step out in faith and go for it. So I sat down with my pastor and I told him about our plans, and I kid you not, it was literally the very next moment when another pastor walked into the room and he announced that he had a big box of seminary textbooks. God instantly confirmed that I'm finally moving in the direction that He wants me to go, and that He's going to provide all that I need. All I have to do is step out where He wants me to go instead of where I want to go. You see, that pastor, he had no idea I was planning on going to seminary, and he gave me this stack of textbooks. I walked away with over $1,000 worth of textbooks that day. And then, 2 weeks later, God showed up again. When my pastor told me that our district had decided to go ahead and pay for me to go full-time at the church so that I can complete my church plant training program while I was still getting ready to go to seminary. And the thing is, we've been trying to get me on full-time at the church for the last 3 years. But the finances just hadn't come together for it. And if the story ended there, it would already be a great story about God's faithfulness when we step out in faith. But the truth is that it wasn't long before I found myself on the edge of another cliff. You see, I called the seminary admissions office and they dropped a bombshell on me. I wasn't eligible for the alternate route program. I wasn't eligible because I hadn't served in a Lutheran church for 10 years. Now, I was devastated to say the least. So I called my pastor, completely convinced that my very last option had just disappeared. You see, I felt like Peter in the Bible when he stepped out onto the water with Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he started to doubt, and so he began to sink. But the thing is that when Peter started to doubt, Jesus reached out His hand and He helped Peter get back into the boat. And as soon as they got back into the boat, the wind stopped. Seeing my frustration, my pastor called the admissions office to see if there was anything that they could do to help me. When he called me back, he said, I have good news and I have bad news. The bad news is that there's absolutely no way around the 10-year stipulation for the alternate route. That one hurt. I didn't know if there was any good news that could cover that. But then he told me the good news. He said that I can enroll in the master's program without having a bachelor's degree. I just have to have 60 undergrad hours in very specific subjects. I was blown away. Only God could do that. Only God could provide a way to earn a master's degree without having a bachelor's degree. And that's when it was obvious that God had been steering the ship the whole time. And that all I had to do was step out in faith. And even when my faith started to waver, even when I started to doubt, God was still faithful. He reached out His hand and He got me back into the boat. And He has provided more than I ever thought possible. But once again, I'm staring at the edge of a cliff. And the only way forward is to step out in faith. You see, in less than a year, I'm going to quit the job that I love. I'm going to sell my house. I'm going to move my family to St. Louis, and I'm going to enroll in seminary. I have no idea how I'm going to pay for it. But God's been faithful every other time that I've stepped out in faith, even in my doubts. And so I'm confident that what I hope for will actually happen. And I trust that He will catch me before I fall. You see, sometimes the only way forward is to step out in faith. So what's your burden? What's your dream? What is it that runs so deep inside of you that it takes over your entire being? Think about it for a second. And then pray about it. And then pray about it some more. And then when the time comes, step out in faith, trusting that God will always be there, even when you don't see it. Because sometimes the only way to move forward is to step out in faith.